What's up, Zelda fans? It's me, Orcrist, and this is part 4 of my Lost Origins series covering Majora's Mask and its mysterious backstory. Turns out there's a lot of grim storylines hidden beneath the surface, and guess what? There's even more to uncover still. In the last video, we explored some of the untold history of Termina and also filled in some of the backstories of its 4 major areas. So, if your favorite thing about Zelda games is the world building and lore elements, be sure to check out part 3. Yet there's one lingering storyline we didn't cover in the last video, namely the temples themselves and the bosses for each dungeon. I think there's some interesting ideas to explore there, so let's jump right in. To start, I think we should establish that each of the 4 temples has a specific purpose, and in some cases too. None of their functions are explicitly stated, but I think there are enough clues to tell us why the temples were constructed in the first place. And whether their function is cultural or utilitarian, they all have one thing in common. The 4 temples of Termina are designed to lock away an evil mask. But before we get too far into the history of each temple, I wanted to discuss the symbolism behind the evil masks. Obviously, we could just dismiss the forms of each boss as just an aesthetic choice by the developers, but I think there's more to it than that. Note that the warrior, bull, giant fish, and twin snakes represent the 4 compass directions surrounding Clocktown. We see something similar in other Zelda games like Breath of the Wild and its 4 guardian beasts. I've also seen this storyline in TV shows about deities in groups of 4, especially representing the 4 compass directions. Naturally, I decided to explore Japanese mythology to see if there's any correlation to the plot of Majora's Mask. What I found is that the 4 cardinal directions have particular significance in the lore of Kyoto. Kyoto mythology tells of 4 guardian spirits that watch over the land and protect its people. Presiding over the north is Genbu the turtle, Seiryu the dragon to the east, Suzaku the flaming bird to the south, and Byaku the white tiger in the west. Each of these gods are symbols of the elements and represent different virtues. There's obviously some loose correlations between Goat the mechanical bull and Genbu, or Seiryu and Twin Mold, but none of them are exactly one-to-one. The bosses are much more obviously inspired by the constellations Orion, Taurus, Pisces, and Gemini, or if you prefer, Draco the Snake, which is part of Ursa Major. Also, unlike the Guardians of Kyoto, these bosses appear to have always been evil. When you beat Woodfall Temple and collect the monster's remains, you get the text, "You have just freed the innocent spirit that this dark mask had kept imprisoned within the body of evil Odolwa." What this passage is implying is that the innocent spirit is the giant, and the body of Odolwa is its prison. This means that each of the 4 evil masks, Odolwa, Goat, Gyorg, and Twin Mold, are transformative, just like the Goron and Zora mask, which contain the powers and likeness of a deceased creature. So my assumption is that the Skull Kid forced a mask onto each giant as both a way of imprisoning the spirit and reviving monsters to do his bidding. Now, the question in my mind is, where did these evil masks come from? You might assume that the Skull Kid created these masks or brought them from somewhere else, but I think there's a better explanation. And this is maybe a disturbing thought, but remember when I said that living entities can transfer their essence into mask form? I think it's the natural order of Termina that any spirit, good or bad, can make this transfer. And if each of these bosses was once a living creature, it's likely that all of them helped shape the history of that area. But with powerful enemies like that in the world, something would need to exist to correct that imbalance. So we'll do our best to figure out just where each of these evil spirits came from and how they met their end. Naturally, we'll start with Woodfall Temple and Odolwa. We established in part 3 that the Deku built the temple and have a very rich culture. I want to expand on that idea by saying Woodfall Temple holds greater significance for the Deku than other temples do for their people. From the game, we see that the temple itself is contained within the heart of Woodfall Mountain and can only be raised if the Sonata of Awakening is played. Furthermore, it's a melody that only the royal family can play, and I think that says something about how closely guarded the temple is. If we take what we know about the Deku Scrubs, the temple could be another place of trial for elite warriors. Each room offers a unique challenge for aspiring Deku warriors, like flying platforms, lily pads over treacherous water, or creatures to battle. But it seems that one room is out of reach, namely the room where Odolwa's mask is contained. Now, the question begs, how did the remains get there? Earlier, we said that Odolwa's model is inspired by Orion the Hunter, but his design has a Mayan feel to it. He's clearly a spirit of war and was extremely dangerous in life. I could imagine that Odolwa himself was the dominant force in the south when the Deku arrived. During this time, I can see Odolwa resisting the Deku from building their new society. It sort of paints the Deku as colonizers and bringers of war, and honestly I don't think that's too far off the mark. but with Adolwa's command of insects and formidable sword skills, I can imagine it was a terrible war. When at last the monster was defeated, his remains were hidden so his form could never harm anyone again. Inside the temple, you can see markings on the wall that warn of an evil presence, and Adolwa's lair is difficult to reach unless you have the power of flight. So when the Skull Kid arrived to imprison the giant, the revival of Adolwa would put the Deku in a state of panic, and given his monstrous reputation, it's not surprising that his first action was to abduct the Deku Princess. Changing things up, I'm going to talk for a minute about the North and Goat, but fair warning, we'll momentarily get off track. I think this boss is unique in that I don't think it was ever alive in the traditional sense, but created in the form you see. But who exactly built this terrible creature and for what purpose? For an answer, I turned my focus to the sea. In the last video, we talked about how it's likely that the pirates constructed Great Bay Temple, given their prowess with steelwork and mechanical engineering. With this in mind, it's just as plausible that the Gerudo also constructed Goat. I like this as a theory, but we'd have to figure out how it came to the north first. I think the simple answer is that Goat made its way into the mountains via the passes above the pirates' fortress. Once it came there, the Gorons became victims of its mighty strength and command over lightning. I believe an ancient Goron hero, likely an ancestor of Darmani, was the one to defeat it and end its reign of terror. Afterward, the mask would need to be contained, and I think the ice arrows are a clue into how that was achieved. And if you look at the temple itself, it almost feels like a prison or a vault. If that's true, you could make the argument that Snow Peak has no cultural significance to the Gorons and is therefore the simplest of the 4 dungeons. Think about it, it's very far away from their village, and there's no specific place of worship like there is in Woodfall. But what stands out most to me about Snow Peak is an idea I referenced in my last video, which is that Gorons stay out of matters bigger than themselves. The path to the temple is narrow and treacherous, and snowballs rolling down the pathway seem designed to stop anyone from reaching the entrance. And maybe the most important detail of all is that the boss room is only accessible by Gorons. No one would be able to reach Goat's remains without meaning to, and the arena where you fight him is impossible for him to escape. So we can assume that Snow Peak is meant to be off limits and treated with respect. Getting back to the origins of Goat and where it came from, why would the pirates build something so powerful? Obviously it's a weapon for their enemies, but what enemies do the pirates have on the open sea? Of course Goat would be limited to land or boats, but its power to summon lightning would make it a deft weapon against creatures of the sea. These enemies might be the Zora, but I think if Goat was involved in the wars between Zora and Gerudo, the Zora would cease to exist. Instead, I would propose the idea that Gyorg was once the great enemy of the Gerudo. Just like Adolwa was once a living threat, Gyorg was a powerful creature and terror to anyone that ventured into its waters. In part 3, we discussed the idea that the pirates are not native to Termina, but settled on the shores of Great Bay at some point. What if the Gerudo didn't come to Termina on purpose? How would they have made their way on shore by accident? Well, consider the Dragon Cloud as an explanation. Regardless of what the game shows us, I want you to consider the idea that the Dragon Cloud isn't an invention of the Skull Kid, but a natural state of the ocean. I could see the Gerudo getting lost in the fog as they traveled the high seas. Then, as they wandered the mists of Great Bay, they may have stumbled onto the domain of Gyorg. Maybe their ship was destroyed and the survivors washed onto shore. Could this be the reason why the Gerudo sailed to Termina and never left? It makes sense, as no ship would be a match for a fish that powerful. With the Gerudo marooned on the shores of Great Bay, their mission would be to find a way to end the monster that put them there. From Link's battle with Gyorg, we know that arrows and other projectiles only stun Gyorg, and its weakness is a mysterious blue energy, almost like electricity. I could see Goat making quick work of Gyorg and its body turning into a mask. Last for the Gerudo was the issue of the Dragon Cloud. This is an interesting story element in Majora's Mask because we really don't understand it. It seems that when the Dragon Cloud is in full effect, it's impossible to navigate the open waters without getting lost. This is of course a big problem for seafaring folk like the Gerudo. They wouldn't be able to plunder nearby ships or islands if they were forever marooned on shore, so they would have to figure out some way to control the cloud. Their solution came in the form of Great Bay Temple. From the game, it seems that when all is well in the temple, its massive gears churn the surrounding water and in turn affect the tides and weather, and when it's disrupted, the ocean returns to its natural, unnavigable state. In this way, you could say that the Gerudo are able to control the Dragon Cloud for their own use, like if they want to surprise ships on the open water. And of course, the most isolated room within the temple contains the remains of Gyorg. With this delicate balance in play, it would be easy for the Skull Kid to force the Mask of Georg onto the giant and disconnect the flow within Great Bay so that no one could reach the temple. I must say, Stone Tower is an interesting temple to say the least, and honestly one of my all-time favorites. I love the variety of puzzles and how your approach changes when rooms are turned upside down. A fascinating aspect to this part of the game are the light arrows and how they function in this world. In the land of Hyrule, light arrows are the prime weapon of the goddess, and often a gift from Zelda herself. Also, they are usually the only weapon that can pierce the defenses of evil. In the Stone Tower though, light arrows aren't so much a weapon against evil, but a way of flipping the natural order. When you turn Stone Tower upside down, it's almost like the dungeon takes on a different personality. It goes from linear and orderly to dangerous and the epitome of chaos. Fiery rocks rain down in certain rooms, and falling off a ledge means a seemingly endless plunge into the sky. Furthermore, when the temple is in this state, it reveals undead enemies like Bubbles and Gomez, the Master of Darkness and Death. But maybe the biggest mystery of all is the portal you enter for the Twin Mold fight. After falling through, you arrive unexpectedly in a vast desert filled with large boulders. It's unclear where exactly this fight takes place, or if you're still in Stone Tower. I wonder if this kaleidoscope-like hole transports you to a faraway land, or if this desert is a different realm entirely. I'd like to explore that last idea a bit more in depth. In the last video, we drew a parallel between Aigos Duakana and the King of Hyrule. We know that the royalty of Hyrule are keepers of powerful magic and the arbiters of secret realms. It stands to reason that the Akana royalty have similar authority. As for the boss of Stone Tower, it's no question that Twin Mold is by far the most dangerous of all the evil spirits in Termina, and their legend pervades many different Zelda games. Their imagery can be seen in Breath of the Wild, Wind Waker, and Skyward Sword. But imagine if you're a resident of Akana and you see two flying worms hundreds of meters long tearing through the canyon. Terrifying as that sounds, I think that's exactly what happened in the early days of Akana. Despite the strength of his army, Aigos knew that there was nothing he could do in defense of an enemy that great. For this reason, he would need to call upon powerful magic to defeat them. My guess is that Aigos used the Giant's Mask to defeat the giant worm, which makes sense given that the army of Akana was led by Skull Kita. But the question begs, where did this mask come from? Was it made by the royal family of Akana to do battle with Twin Mold in ancient times? Or is the Giant's Mask the spirit of a once great warrior of the Akana army? To me, it looks like the face of a stone golem or a battle helm, so it would make sense that it once had physical being. But maybe it's similar to Goat in that regard, not a living creature, but a creation of the Akana. Whatever its origins, I think it's clear that the Giant's Mask is a spirit for good, and is a closely guarded treasure of the royal family. And the hidden realm where Twin Mold lies, it's the only place that Aigos could ensure that Twin Mold would never threaten his kingdom again, in life or death. Well, I think that's enough for me, guys. We spent the last two videos talking about Termina's history, and the others discussing physics and the natural order of Termina, but we've left one big topic on the table, Majora's Mask itself. I think it's very easy for us to simplify the plot of this game down to its core elements. The Skull Kid was banished by the giants and is using great power to have his revenge on the world. But as Majora itself says, a puppet that can no longer be used as mere garbage. So next time, we're going to peek into the mind of Majora and uncover a plot that's been hidden from record ever since this game's inception. Until then, check me out on Twitch and Twitter at orchrist_GC, and be sure to look at my other videos too. I love making friends and I'd love to chat with you on stream sometime. Stay safe, and see you on the other side, gamers.